that is now doing freelance writing. She gives these kinds of talks around the country. She's on the advisory board for the Poynter Institute. She was named an emerging leader for the Global Economic Forum, something like that. And I think it'll be a great talk. She's going to speak for approximately 40 minutes, so we'll have 20 minutes for questions. So think of your questions. Tweet, the hashtag is at RSJ, and you can see her Twitter name is there. So we're looking forward very much to hearing from Monica.
Thanks, Donna. Hi, guys. It's been really fun. This is actually my first time in Nevada. And the casinos in the airport, not the casinos, the slot machines in the airport are so funny, and I tweeted them out. It's like, you're not kidding about this, crazy. So so I'm going to talk to you about some crazy ideas about how the landscape for journalism has changed and where I think it means that journalism needs to go. Not too long ago, about a month ago, I came across this post. It was one of the best profiles of Bill Gates I've ever read. And it wasn't a newspaper profile. No one journalist wrote it up. How many of you are familiar with Reddit? Most, if not all of you. Okay, so this was an AMA, an Ask Me Anything. This is the second year that Bill Gates has done an AMA. An AMA is a Reddit format that just has taken off, where people who are famous or have done something interesting for one reason or another present themselves to be interrogated by the general public, including people like President Obama and Bill Gates. And as you go down through the thread, you see this conversation where Bill, who is now once again the richest man in the world, by the way, that came out, I think, a couple days ago, just reveals some fascinating details about himself. And it makes you think, all these things that journalists used to sort of have the monopoly on doing, the public can do for itself. People are doing on their own through various channels. So, they can go on Google News and search and just decide which story they want to read, which headline sounds most interesting. They don't have to rely on the paper that lands on their doorstep. They can go to Twitter and type in some trending keyword and just, read what's there. And you guys are familiar with this. This has been true for years. This is not new. So for journalists, it means that we just have to ask ourselves, how do we stack up against this anymore? What does it mean to be a journalist when this can happen? Some really fascinating, amazing things that don't need a professional journalist to bring it all together or to bring it out into the public and into people's attention. So we're going to talk about that, and I don't know why that did not just come up with the slide, but yes, that's another little Reddit thing, to make the whole slide more messy. That was my point. Big mess. All this is a big mess. Okay. Not to mention that, of course, and this is a really fascinating comparison, when Pope Benedict, right, kind of was presented in 2005, that's the picture. And then when Pope Francis came out in 2013, that's the picture. So you see the difference very, very clearly. People are their own journalists. People can document their own ways. Just a smartphone is all you need now. With a smartphone, you can do what a newspaper reporter back in the 1950s was really the only person who could do. And so everybody has that power. And what does it mean? So I think it means that this is the age of the self-informing public. And in a way, it's always been the age of the self-informing public. Journalism grew out of the public's desire to inform itself. We bumped into people in the street and talked about what was up with us, but we wanted to know what was up with our town, what was up with our neighborhood, and journalism arose out of that. And then it became a real principle for democracy. We want to protect our society and live better and stronger civic lives by knowing what is going on that affects us. And that happens on a local level, a hyperlocal level, a national level, a street level. So it's really always been true, but never as easy as it is today. So I think this means we have to rethink a bunch of things. We have to rethink our mission as journalists, what we're even out to do. Rethink our audience, which has completely changed. Rethink ourselves, how we present ourselves, who we are, and how we interact with this public or this audience. And also rethink our ethics. And I'm involved with a couple of efforts to do that last part, which is a real challenge, but incredibly important. So in 2009, which I can't believe was 5 years ago, I mean, this really has been going on a long time, In Lakewood, Washington, a man walked into a coffee shop and shot and killed 4 police officers who were just having coffee that morning. And it was this huge, huge story, and it became this big manhunt for this guy who just kind of ran around the city and nobody knew where he was. And this was 2009, and it was one of the first times that I saw so much gravitation toward Twitter. People weren't going to the Seattle Times site. They weren't going to the Seattle PI, the 2 big news sources in the city. They weren't even going to, the TV station website. They were going to Twitter because this was happening 24/7, the manhunt. Now he's in this neighborhood. Now he's in that neighborhood. I want to know if he might be close to where I am. Should I be worried? What about my kids? And it was this crazy time where people wanted to share not just what was going on, but how they were feeling. And I think we're seeing the self-informing public get activated, not just for an interest about what's going on, but an interest to share the emotion in some big developing event. We're going to talk about a few other case studies. The Seattle Times won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news reporting for their 2009 breaking news coverage of this story, largely because they were really, really good on Twitter and with a bunch of other digital media tools. In fact, this guy, David Boardman, was the executive editor of the Seattle Times at the time, and he tweeted the biggest scoops. And he was just in his paper managing the coverage, and he would just put it out. And this is all normal now. Back then, it was still pretty fresh, still pretty new. And the fact that it felt like such neutral territory. When people went to Twitter to follow this one hashtag, WA shooting, to figure out what was going on with this, all hours of the day and night, it was a new kind of news stream. It was a news stream that didn't care about who was competing with who or whether this was one brand's version of the story or another brand's version of the story. Everybody was just coming into the same stream. And not only that, but public voices were able to come in. So if somebody saw police officers, rolling by their own street, they could tweet, here they are, and put up a picture. And so the public story was the public's to tell, which didn't used to be possible. And now it is, and we see that over and over and over again. So to the mission, how do we rethink the mission when people can inform themselves? And I think it's kind of a logical conclusion, which is that informing a self-informing public is no longer enough. So if journalists have sort of seen their exclusive role as being the source of information for the civic good and for the public good, that can't be our exclusive role anymore. That's certainly a primary role. It remains a primary role because as much as people are empowered to be their own reporters when they carry this around, doesn't mean they have the time or the inclination to actually cover their communities the way communities ought to be covered. But they can at any time be that kind of journalist, that kind of witness. Journalists still do need to do the information sourcing and reporting, but it can't be enough. It can't be enough anymore. So then what else do journalists do in the age of the self-informing public? And now switching a bit over to audience. Anyone recognize this guy? A lot of you said you knew Reddit. By chance? Okay. This is Morgan Jones. He was 18 years old in 2012, and he was playing video games one night in Denver, Colorado. And then he saw on his Facebook page that a local TV station had posted that there had been shooting at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, and they were going to go check it out. So if you guys remember this was, is it Jesse or James Holmes? Jesse Holmes, who ended up killing like a dozen people at a screening of The Dark Knight, and it was just crazy. Well, 18-year-old Morgan Jones, who is not a journalist, he was playing video games, started a Reddit page and went around and just grabbed a bunch of different resources. He grabbed the Aurora police department scanner and the fire department website, and he put together everything that every news site was reporting into this Reddit page. And that Reddit page became the most comprehensive, well-reported, detailed timeline of the events of that night. And as details were coming out, he was sort of figuring out, like gathering up all the tidbits in a way that nobody else could. And in fact, his page was during that night became a resource for the paid reporters who wanted to know what was going on. And they would kind of check his page and then go off to find something. And of course, no one knew who he was at the time. He was just a handle on a website. But after a while, BuzzFeed and Huffington Post found out this is an 18-year-old kid who's able to do this. And that really changes things. And it makes you ask just, who is this audience? He could have just seen that Facebook post and go, okay, whatever. There's a shooting. I'll probably read more about it later. And what was amazing, too, was in that Reddit page, he started this just ball rolling where people from all over the place started saying, oh, I'm seeing this newspaper's reporting this website's reporting that. And the thread just continued and continued on Reddit and kept updating and kept updating. And people would say, thank you for having such a comprehensive timeline. 18-year-old kid. So who is the audience? Jay Rosen, who spoke in this series not too long ago, way back in 2006, talked about the people formerly known as the audience. So we've known this for a while too, that the audience is not just an audience. And if we still think of them as an audience, still treat them as an audience, and still think of our relationship with them as one of source and audience, we're not living in reality. The people formerly known as the audience can at any time become journalists, or at least witnesses, or at least megaphones. So what does that mean? What do journalists then do when that's the capability of the audience? And again, it's important to note, this is not new. 2006 was a long time ago when this idea first came out. It wasn't very heavily adopted, but I think by now it's becoming very, very obvious. So how then do you serve? How do you serve an audience that used to be an audience and is now something more? And it does come from this acknowledgement that the relationship between journalists and the public is changing. It is not one of source and receiver, like a one-way kind of thing. It's always been a little bit two-way, obviously. Journalism has to be two-way. The reporter's job has always been to listen to the community, to have an eye on the pulse of it, know where people's interests are, know what should be reported on, and where the information needs of a community are. But now it's not just up to the journalists. People can really do it on their own. So one of the key words here, of course, are journalists and the public. The public, again, can also be a journalist at any time. So it's just a very, very fluid definition. So what then do journalists do beyond inform in this time of the self-informing public? And I think one thing they do is they guide. They have to not just be the source of great information and maybe ignore competitors like they used to do back in the newspaper days of 10 years ago. But they also have to guide. So when I started at the PI back in 2007, and I wanted to link to something in the Seattle Times because it was interesting and it was useful to my readers, there were editors who said, no, you're not linking to the Seattle Times. Well, you can't do that. But it's useful. But my readers want to know. Readers don't care. No, we can't link to the Seattle Times. My editor talked with that editor, and then we linked to the Seattle Times. But those were the cultural battles we were fighting, and I think we're kind of finally getting over them, where people deserve to know the best information. And if a journalist only considers his or her job to be to provide that information, but not guide them to other information, even if it's not the journalist's own reported stuff, then we're not really serving our public as well as we could. Model. I think this one is really, really important. Model good informational discipline. Journalists and members of the public exist in the same spaces, are writing in the same places, on Twitter, on Facebook, on blogs, online. We're all in the same places, and everybody's got a voice. So when journalists are modeling how to report news responsibly, when a rumor is just a rumor, and when you can actually tell that it's really fact, when a reporter tweets, I made a mistake in my story, that's modeling good informational discipline for everybody else. And that's becoming more and more important. This is not a time to sit out of that or to take a step to the side and say, oh, that's just the public doing the public's thing. We don't care. It's time to kind of go in and say, hey guys, next time, think of it this way. Or be more careful, and then we'll be fine. And then we're not going to think every celebrity is dead when they're not, or whatever it happens to be. And convene and join is incredibly important. Not too long ago, most journalists really could sort of write their story and call it a day. But I think today, more than ever, it's when you write your story that the work really begins. It's when you publish that the work really begins. Because the public is now going to react and respond and hopefully share and hopefully breathe more life into that story and give some reaction. And the journalist has to listen. Because if the journalist's not listening, then you're not even part of the information community you're serving and creating. But standing outside that just doesn't make any sense anymore. So you convene communities around your stories and you join. You join in that discussion. You want that dialogue. You want it to get stronger. And you look in people's reactions for your next story. And you'll usually find it. There's something in that. And so you want people to react and you want to be there when they do. So I think what this comes down to, the crazy idea out of this, is that journalism is not just stories and articles and photos and photo essays and multimedia and videos and broadcasts. Cultivating strong, self-informing communities is itself an act of journalism. If the point of journalism is to strengthen a public through information, then if you can help them get the habits and the right informational discipline and the right resources to inform themselves, you have accomplished the job of journalism without necessarily writing a story. And this is, it sounds crazy even to me, but I think it's true. So we're going to talk about a big case study, the Boston Marathon bombing last year, which was just nuts. I still can't believe it happened. And it showed us just how much things have changed when it comes to how people learn and share information and how much they care about what can be known. So you guys might have followed this. When the bombing happened, investigators said, well, y'all were taking lots of pictures. Send them to us, because we need to figure out who's behind this. So, of course, you all were taking lots of pictures. Those are your pictures. People shared them with each other. Reddit, again, became that site where people started sharing the pictures they had taken of the bombing and going on their own little, just hunt for who the people might be. And I'm sure a lot of you followed this. There were a lot of false leads. There was a lot of concern about, wait a minute, is the mob, the public mob, really qualified to be doing this? Is this scary? Is this wrong? And those are valid questions. But this was the instinct. The instinct was, we all have this material. We want to help. And I think that's kind of encouraging, that people don't just say, this horrible thing happened. I hope they figure it out. People say, this horrible thing happened. What can we do? So this picture came out, and then it became clear that they were looking for a particular set of people. And things got a little more heated. The speculation got more intense on all these public forums. But during that whole night, that was the first time since college that I had stayed up all night. And I didn't need a Red Bull, and I was proud of that. But I was up all night. I couldn't stop. It was so riveting. And all I did, I didn't watch TV. I just had Twitter on. And I kept linking, following links and seeing what the New York Times was saying and seeing what the Boston Globe was saying and seeing what everybody on Twitter was saying through this hashtag Watertown. And all the mysteries during that night just kept driving you forward. Do we even really know that this has to do with the Boston bombing? What if the shooting of a police officer in Watertown is completely unrelated? And what's going on with all the gunshots fired? And what about these SWAT teams? And what's happening? And this was a particularly good case study for what's going on with the self-informing public because it was the middle of the night. Paid journalists were asleep, far away, in their beds. And it took a while for some of them to wake up. So meanwhile, people aren't sitting around waiting for them to wake up. People are sharing their own information because they're scared. They're in their homes. Something is happening. So they're tweeting stuff out. They're sharing it however they can. And, online producers at news sites all over the country are scrambling to figure out what's really happening. So it's this race, but it's also this emotional television show. It's this gripping drama, and we're all drawn in. So this says, if you want to know what happened in Watertown 5 hours ago, turn on the TV. If you want to know what's going on now, turn on Twitter. And that was very, very true that night. So these pictures got retweeted 13,000 times. But this is the witness thing. This is somebody who's just at home. And there's a SWAT team on my shed. Snap the picture, send it out. And this is news. This is first person reporting. This is breaking news. And this is not a journalist. But then again, it is. So Shauna England just put this out, And it became part of the story because how could it not? Now, this says, I never thought I would spend an entire night with 80,000 people glued to a police scanner. This was another incredibly fascinating, different, crazy thing that happened that night. Now, how many of you were up that night? Any chance any of you were? Okay, good. So some of you are familiar. So it's become kind of custom online that, so many things have become public, but nobody really cares until it matters. And a lot of police scanners have some online channel somewhere. You can find it. So thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people tuned into the Boston police scanner. Now, when I was a cop reporter in Houston, I couldn't understand what the scanner was saying. I couldn't. But I understood from my editor that I had to be incredibly careful. The scanner is not public information. The scanner is actionable information so cops can do their jobs. Somebody has to be able to say, I think I saw the suspect on 49th Street. They shouldn't not say that because it might not be true. They have to say it. And then the other person has to go, I'm going to go check it out, right? So this channel for actionable communication is public, has been for years, but is now being picked up by everybody, so hungry to know the latest developments that before you know it, all those we think start to become facts on Twitter. And, they caught this guy and they got that guy, and I heard about that guy, and none of it was true, but this was a lot of public voices getting to experience a primary source that had not been so critically important at such an emotional time. We'd never seen anything like this. By the early morning, the Boston Police Department actually tweeted out, hey, y'all, can you chill out with the scanner? Because you're kind of telling the suspect what we're doing. And just be careful, because what you're saying is not all true. And so there were worries that what if Boston police are actually censoring themselves on their most important channel for doing their jobs because of what public voices were doing with the information? That got a little scary. We can't let those channels be censored. So then what is the solution? Biggest misinformation tragedy of the night. Some of you may recognize this man. Sunil Tripathi was a university student who had gone missing. His family had set up, and this was before all this manhunt stuff. His family had set up a Facebook page, to find their son. They were very, very worried. They had gotten a lot of support. I think held a couple events here and there, and just really, really loved their son and wanted to find him. And at some point in that night, somebody tweeted, and actually, what's his name? Alexis Madrigal of The Atlantic traced this rumor back to its original tweet. And some guy tweeted, I just heard on the scanner, which 80,000 people were listening to. I just heard on the scanner the name Sunil Tripathi. He's a suspect. And so people went, oh my God, he's a suspect. Now, before that tweet came out, there was a Reddit page that was speculating whether Sunil Tripathi could be the suspect. Some things about it seem to make some sense. He kind of looks like one of the guys in the picture. Maybe he went missing because he's part of this terrorist God knows what, right? So this happens. Turns out, Alexis Madrigal, like the next day, went through the recording of the Boston police scanner traffic. Sunil Tripathi's name never came up, ever. But that single tweet with that speculation became the source for the most rampant rumor of the night. The rumor's so rampant and so popular, retweeted so often, that I was sitting there going, this has to be true, this has to be true. And I wanted to retweet it so bad. But then I was like, no, I gotta find a source. And there was a point where someone I very much respect, with tens of thousands of followers in Seattle, tweeted that this was true. And so I DM'd him and I said, hey, how do you know? Where's your source? And he goes, well, everybody's saying it on Twitter. And I said, well, that's not a source. I need a source. Like, where did you get this? And he's like, it's just everywhere. I was like, okay, well, all right, I guess I'm not going to tweet it. Sure enough, it wasn't true. And when the rumor got really big, particularly on this one Reddit page, people started going to the Facebook page of the family looking for their son, calling them horrible things. And the damage done to them was crazy, particularly because a couple weeks later they found the body of their son. This is some of the conversation on that Reddit page. Does anyone have an independent confirmation of the report on the police scanner? I mean, other than people just claiming to hear it. You do realize there are more than 80,000 people listening to the scanner right now? Yes, we all heard it. We all confirm it. Really, really, really easy for people to just assume things. So this is the family of Sunil. A tremendous and painful amount of attention's been cast on our beloved son in the past 12 hours. We've known all along he's not part of this, et cetera, et cetera. There's an SPJ ethics principle about minimizing harm. Journalists take that very seriously. You are very careful with your reporting because people are involved in news. And this is one of those where someone was very, very hurt by a rumor that went pretty wild and that people just started to just believe. And I'll say this, lots of journalists on Twitter tweeted and retweeted that rumor. Lots of journalists did. Because in the heat of the moment, even informational discipline, even by the pros who are supposed to know better, can be really hard. And it's important to sympathize with that and understand why it's hard. Oh yeah, the guy who created the subreddit that sort of started the whole public sleuthing thing ended up doing his own sort of AMA, Ask Me Anything. And somebody said, people were saying, it's not your fault. All you do, you just like to do things on the internet. We shouldn't expect you to get things right like a journalist. You're not a journalist. Whatever. Don't feel bad, dude. And he's like, I feel bad. I regret this. So we're going to come back to that question of responsibility because I think it's really important. Now, I said earlier that there's something really encouraging in what happened after Boston, that people wanted to do something. Reddit gets a lot of bad rap. It gets a really, really bad rap because of all the false things that can happen there or rumors that go spin out of control. But very few people talk about the things that are beautiful and wonderful on that site. And I think Reddit has perfected a model of self-informing communities. There's a bunch of subreddits that are amazing self-informing communities. And the model is merely rules, moderators, and content. That's it. And moderators that enforce certain rules about what can get posted on a subreddit, what can't get posted on a subreddit. And I'm amazed at what happens out of that. So this is Random Acts of Pizza. Anybody heard of Random Acts of Pizza? No? Oh my gosh. Coolest subreddit ever. Random Acts of Pizza are people who are sad, just broke up with someone, just lost their job, just having a terrible day. And they go on Random Acts of Pizza and they go, I'd really like a pizza. Can anyone get me a pizza? And then people go, sure, I'll get you pizza. And there's a whole system they've built here so that you can call. There's like a way to anonymize the address, kind of. It's weird. And you can call and order a pizza for a stranger who's just reached out to you because they're in trouble. It's beautiful. These are people helping each other out with pizza. So Reddit is capable of incredible things. Reddit is the best place for actionable information. And the instinct to want to see the news and do something about it is a good instinct. We should not think that's a bad instinct. So journalists in the self-informing public don't just inform, we guide, we point people to good information, we point people to the relevant actors. That's a term by Clay Shirky, who's so brilliant. I love him. If you haven't heard of him, you should look him up and check him out. He's an incredible writer and speaker. But he talks about how news these days, when the truth can be so crazy and there's just rumors and things and so many different sources and voices, that journalists can be pointing people to the relevant actors. Here's a story that broke. Well, here are the feeds you want to follow. Here's the subject of the story, and here's how you can hear from them. And here's some of the stakeholders in the story, and here's where you can go to learn more about them. Pointing to the relevant actors helps steer people away from information that is not helpful. And then, of course, convening and joining. Journalists were in on some of these Reddit threads. Maybe some of the voices cautioning people against jumping to conclusions. Maybe some of them were professional journalists. We don't know. But convening and joining instead of standing apart going, ha, you guys always mess up, that's going to lead to a better society. This is Jennifer Peter, a reporter at the Boston Globe. A marathon suspect is in custody as manhunt continues for another in Watertown, according to official with knowledge of the investigation. The Boston Globe did incredible reporting that night. They did a really, really good job. They're, of course, the local paper. You'd think they'd have the relationships to get some of the real important information out. 2,000 retweets. And I put this up here because just because it's a self-informing public doesn't mean that journalists don't have an outsized influence. And we do and we should, but we should earn it. When journalists do their job really well, they're paid attention to. People know this is someone from the Boston Globe. And so I looked, and I saw, what are people saying? You know, when somebody like Jennifer throws out something that's new in the news in a night of a lot of rumor and a lot of speculation. And people are going, marathon suspect? Nobody but you has said that. What are your sources? Are you positive? One unnamed source, I hope you're right. In other words, people are not stupid. People are learning that I'm not going to believe everything I see. I'm not going to believe everything I read. I'm going to challenge even the journalists. You know, well, NBC's not reporting this yet. CNN's not reporting that yet. People are starting to compare and contrast. They are learning, and it is cool. It's really, really cool. Little bit of a segue, because this goes both ways. Now that it's the age of the self-informing public, one of the things journalists need to do more is, as geographic barriers have broken down, any news source can reach anybody in the world. When your reach is bigger, your ears have to be bigger. You have to be able to listen to more reaction and prepare for it. Anybody know about the Dr. V story? Raise your hand if you heard about this. Couple of you did. Okay. So Grantland, which is kind of an offshoot of ESPN, an incredible site with wonderful writing, published the story of Caleb Hannon, a young writer who's amazing. And this was a story about Dr. S.A.V. and this putter that she created and how amazing it was. And then when the story first came out, everyone was like, this is a beautiful story. And everybody shared it as this beautiful, beautiful story, and it got a lot of views. And then a couple days later, the tide turned against the story in a really big way. And the question became, how dare you run this? And the reason that happened was because the main character, Dr. V, was transgender. And during the course of the reporting, the reporter outed her and did some very interesting, very subtle things that, long story short, ended up being disrespectful to transgender identity in ways that hadn't been obvious to the writer or to the editors. So the editor of Grantland published this incredibly transparent and detailed apology, where basically he said, wow, we checked and rechecked and rechecked and rechecked the story. We thought we had talked about it from all the angles. We never talked to somebody in the transgender community about this. For that, we are deeply sorry. Now, if it hadn't been for the possibility of having that public reaction evolve, and for what is a minority stake, the transgender community, is beginning to convince everybody that something's wrong here, then they may not have learned this lesson. And this lesson then got echoed into everybody else. So this was a big Twitter deal when this happened, which was not January 15th, not long ago. So I encourage you to look up the apology, because that's what corrections are evolving into. Corrections are evolving into, we are accountable to you, and you guys need to help us understand how to do our jobs better. So a little bit back to Boston. SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists, tweeted this: as you report, and this was middle of the night, as you report, remember, no one will remember who was first this week. We'll remember who was wrong. And they were absolutely right. For those of you who followed, CNN was the laughingstock that night. John King reported that there had been an arrest when there hadn't been. A bunch of sites just kind of followed it. Maybe not blindly, because, as we all know, news is hard. News is really hard. Maybe one source is really, really sure that something happened, but you have to be the judge of how credible they are. So yeah, that is absolutely sort of the big thing. Now here we're going to turn a little bit to, I was saying that, we have to rethink our mission, rethink our audience, rethink ourselves, who we are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about branding. This is Pete Williams of NBC. And the reason I'm putting this slide up is because he was the hero of Boston Marathon manhunt reporting. That happened in April. He didn't tweet in April at all. He was the hero without tweeting. He trended on Twitter. And a bunch of media reporters, called to tell him so. And what he said was, I don't want to be trending on anything. The reason he was the hero was because he got it right. He was reporting for NBC, and he got everything right when no one else had gotten it right. This guy's just a great reporter. So people started tweeting about him. I'm watching Pete Williams. Shut up. I'm watching Pete Williams. Pete Williams is on. Everybody tune in. So again, the self-informing public is not stupid. They are smart and getting smarter. They know where the credible sources are. They're not just listening to everybody. They made Pete Williams a huge hero that night, and he wasn't even on Twitter. So, yeah. I'll get back to branding in a second. Oh, here's that, yeah. Turn that down. I want to listen to Pete Williams. Boop. The best way to brand yourself is to be out there and be amazing. Last several years have been, and I've talked about this with the faculty and here, it's been there are so many things being thrown at journalists these days, so many new obligations, and among them are promoting your own material, building your personal brand, marketing your stories. These are things we didn't have to worry about. They do matter, but they can't matter as much as just being amazing at what you do. And those basic skills, knowing how to tell a story, that is absolutely the most powerful way to build a brand. So we're going to get back to that in a bit. So what does it mean then when we have to rethink ourselves and who we are? What does that mean? So now more than ever, I think it means being available. Journalists who are sitting in newsrooms and don't want to engage with the public, don't want to read comments, only interface with their editors and their sources. That's not going to fly. That does not fly anymore. It flew for a while, but those days are over. Be approachable. Having a presence in places where the public can see you is not enough. There are ways to be approachable. Tweeting merely what you write is one way to not be approachable. If you're never engaged in a dialogue, it's one way to not be approachable. Want a dialogue. I think this is really, really, really key. There are ways to write stories and to share your stories that say, here's the answer, read it. And there are ways to write your story that say, hey, I want to talk about something. Here's what I've learned. What do you think? The latter is going to be more useful to everyone, including yourself. Grow bigger ears. I mentioned that earlier. That's actually a quote from Chris Brogan, who's a big social media guru. But grow bigger ears is a good principle to keep in mind in today's journalism. Listening to community has always been just a core key principle of journalism, but now it's not enough to just kind of open an email when one comes to you. You have to actually be proactive in how you listen, and that's part of what's so different. Oh, it's already 4:40, okay. I don't know why this slide is in here again, but guide, model, convene, and join. I thought I know this. Anyway. So, very interesting anecdote I wanted to share about Boston. So, all those people who tweeted that misidentified suspect caused harm. All those people who caused that harm. And they may think they didn't because nobody's really giving them the responsibility in a big way. When you go back and look for those tweets, they're gone. They just deleted them, right? They just deleted them. When journalists make a mistake, they don't just delete the story. There's a reason for that, right? It's because there's a responsibility. The public's not feeling that responsibility right now. I think they're learning it, though. I got this direct message from the guy that I had asked, who had the tens of thousands of followers, where's your source? And he said, everybody's my source. And I called him out on that. And he said, this is Twitter. I'm not a journalist. I don't have journalistic credentials, but I have an audience. Lesson learned. And I loved that. I was like, yes, exactly. I take issue with I'm not a journalist. Like, that's not an excuse. That's not even true. You were a journalist tonight. You shared information, and that information mattered, and you were a megaphone for it with a particularly large number of followers. You absolutely were a journalist. Don't have journalistic credentials? Meh. What are journalistic credentials? We'll talk about that. You journalism students. But I have an audience, lesson learned. The audience is what matters. If you're sharing information that matters to people, and it is wrong, you should be responsible. So that leads to another wild idea. Who can share information? Everyone. Who should be responsible for the information they share? Everyone. Why are we forgiving the public? It's just the public, it's the public, whatever. But demanding some from, the professional journalists. Why not demand it from everybody? Why not? What harm could there possibly be in that? Now, it does go both ways. There's learning that happens back to the professional journalists who think they know everything. The Journal News in Westchester County, New York, after the Newtown shootings, published a map with the names and addresses of everybody who owned guns on their site. And it was very interesting because it was public information in that if you wanted to, you could go and look it up. But nobody had. The newspaper published this, and there was a bit of an uproar. And this is one of those very interesting issues. The line between what is public and what is published is starting to become really distinct because so much out there in the age of the self-informing public is public, but not publicized, I should say. So then what responsibility do journalists have for the information that is public, but that they publicize? And what do they say in that information? And are they respecting their community when they do it? So I like this line from David Carr. He's a media critic at the New York Times and wonderful columnist. Publishing is a discrete act, separate from whether something is public or not. So this is one of those issues in ethics that is kind of new and that we have to be very careful about. So another thing, and you'll not hear this case study from anyone but me. As far as I know, I'm the only one to worry about it. But BuzzFeed, gotta love BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed challenges things just every day. But they wrote after the Miss America pageant, they wrote this post that got, almost 6 million views. A lot of people are very upset that an Indian American woman won the Miss America pageant. Now, I don't have Wi-Fi in here, so I can't show you the post. The post was basically embedded tweets from people who said racist things about the woman who won Miss America. Now, let's think about the news value of this. People on the internet say racist, horrible things. Is that new? No. People on the internet said racist, horrible things about this woman winning. Is that news? Yeah, that I can see how that's news. Okay, cool. But here's where I see a bit of a problem. They embedded those tweets. And when you went back, it became viral the next day. It started getting millions of page views the next day. When you go into those tweets and you follow it over to the Twitter profile of these people, it's like they all ran away. More than half of them, the accounts no longer exist. They're gone. They were shamed. They're gone. And some of them just became, their whole account is nothing but defending themselves against an army of people coming after them for, admittedly, saying racist, horrible things. But here's where I start to see a problem. When we quote sources, we like to know who they are, what the context is for what they're saying. And so part of what worried me was, what if one of these people was like a 12-year-old kid repeating what his dad said, just for a laugh? What if that kid went to school the next day and everybody thought all kinds of things about him? We don't even have the faces of these people. Could the news value have been just quoting the tweets without linking straight to these people's profiles? Why did we have to connect to people we didn't even know who they were or why they said what they said? Now, this is a very controversial thing. I don't expect you to agree with me at all. But I think that's problematic. And when it comes to respecting the community and respecting the self-informing public, people on the internet are still people. Maybe we should still figure out who they are and what the context is before, you embed 20, 30 tweets publicly and then kick everybody out of their social media presence. So I was saying, what are journalistic credentials anyway? The reason I said that, I did not get a journalism degree. I studied sociology. But I consider my journalism degree to have come from 2 years right after my undergrad, where I got this fellowship with Hearst newspapers. And my first rotation was in Houston, at the Houston Chronicle, where I was the cop reporter. And I was completely out of my element. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Every day was survival, and I would pray nothing bad would happen. And of course, bad things happen all the time in Houston. It's like 1 or 2 homicides a day, and what are you going to do? And it was just a struggle to survive. And I had been the kind of college student who could cram her way to an A if she tried hard enough. And I was used to that. Just tell me how to do it and I'll do it. I'll knock it out of the park. And I came to Houston and I was at the bottom of the totem pole and I could not cram my way up. And it sucked. And after a few months, my patience had just gone away. My self-confidence had gone away. And I talked to my advisor in the fellowship and we went out for lunch and I started crying. And I said, I can't take this anymore. I'm trying so hard and I'm making so many mistakes and I'm not getting better. And what needs to happen? What am I not doing? And he said, you only learn by doing. It's gonna take time. You just have to be patient. You only learn by doing. And that was a really good lesson. So when we think about the self-informing public, they only learn by doing. This is my last slide anyway, so I'm not going to worry about that. They do all only learn by doing. We only learn by doing. So in this new world, self-informing public, new relationship, a little bit of patience and a little bit of faith, and I think we're going to end up with a better information society than we've ever had. So with that, I will take questions. Yeah.
Community at large, what do you kind of see the role of a university student newspaper? I mean, how can they act to inform the university public and also the community that they're serving?
Well, I think there's a lot of things to do. I think that there's no need to limit yourself to the university. There's no need to limit yourself to University Matters. Universities are full of the next generation. It's a great place to ask what's coming next and to just tap into the minds of people to see what they think is coming next. But I know you've got partnerships with public radio here. A lot of universities are working to partner with professional media organizations here and there. But I think it's really important. Again, you learn by doing. So find ways to actually be doing journalism as a student all the time, whether or not you're writing for the paper. I don't know if that answers your question. Do you have a particular idea or kind of thought?
I mean, I work at the student newspaper here, and so I'm just kind of curious about what kind of role that people, I mean, in the community think that the student newspaper should serve. I mean, it's kind of hard when you have that tunnel vision, you're in the mix all the time, but
Yeah.
I mean, what do you kind of like see the student newspaper as? Like when you were going to college, what did you kind of see its purpose as? How has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, the Bowdoin College paper was actually the oldest, it still is, the oldest continuously publishing college weekly in the United States, because it's an old school, and what are you going to do? But, I mean, they covered the administration. They covered the university. And I was most proud of the paper when we, just went up to the administration and said, this doesn't make sense. We want more information. Give us more, right? And that's really hard to do. Students are very busy. The paper is not their priority or not their first thing. You're a student. And the administrations sometimes think they can kind of get away with, it's just the paper or whatever. Just throw that person at them. So I think it's so cool when college journalists, particularly right now, one thing that I think that is really high potential is data, which is a big hot word right now, thanks to Nate Silver and all that jazz. But data is incredibly powerful. And when you can get more of the information that in many universities should already be public, but actually have it with you all the time and keep building it and keep collecting it, then you're going to find stories before anybody else, and you're going to find important stories that you're not going to need some interview with a university administrator to confirm. If you want a good model of that, Homicide Watch. Anyone heard of Homicide Watch? HomicideWatch.org. They're so good. They built their name off tracking every single homicide in Washington, D.C. But what they do that is amazing is every time a homicide comes up, they add it to a database in a bunch of different ways. So they're not going article to article. A lot of cop reporters might just go, okay, what's happening today? What's happening today? What's happening today? They are building databases. So at any point, they can consult their database and go, well, isn't this interesting? Let me write about this. Here's a pattern. Here's something emerging. So data is easier now than ever. So that's going to have a lot of potential to unlock those stories. Yeah.
About personal branding, do you think that individual journalist credibility is more important now than say the publication that you're attached to is credibility? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know that it is generally always more important, but it is more important than it's ever been. I do think that it was easier to be a journalist and not have anyone notice because they were all too focused on the organization you wrote for, and that was the brand that mattered. But when I make a mistake in an article, and I tweeted the article and it was an error, I tweet the correction. I tweet, hey, I messed up, new thing in here. So that's something that journalists themselves didn't used to think was their responsibility in a way. Like, well, the paper's going to print the correction tomorrow, so it's fine. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that what you say is what you say, and what you say wrong and what you say right. So that's one example of, I think more of the responsibility is on each person, and that there's nothing to hide behind anymore. And there shouldn't be. And I'm a freelancer. I write for the Seattle Times. I don't work for them. And I'm glad. I like being free. And I like sort of, I think a lot of people who read me, they may not even care whether I wrote something for GeekWire or Seattle Times. They care that I wrote it. And they get to it sometimes through my own channels, my own like, hey, check this out. And that's not the majority of my readers. I mean, obviously, the way the Times and GeekWire promotes their stuff is the main channel still to my stories, but it's an important channel. So yeah, I think it is a lot more important. And brands know that. You guys might know about, God, what's his name? I can't think of it. Nate Silver, but also, who's the Washington Post? Thank you, yes. So now we're at a time when people leave the New York Times. Leave the New York, why would you leave the New York Times? Leaving the Washington, where are you going? Vox Media? What's Vox Media? You're going back to ESPN? Why? And it's because those places are not the destinations they used to be. When you have, Nate Silver, he drove some obscene amount of traffic to the New York Times over the election. That's incredible. So he can do some things on his own outside that brand, and he should. Yeah.
What would you say to potential future journalists who are hesitant to go into social media, get a Twitter, get a Reddit, that kind of thing? Is that important?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. Yeah. It's essential to be on Twitter and Facebook. Reddit, I think, is absolutely essential to know how it works. Because it is so anonymous, it's a very awkward place for journalists. It is so anonymous. And some of its power comes from anonymity. And I respect the anonymity on Reddit often. And sometimes it does damage. But a lot of times it's really, really beautiful. What people are willing to share and say that they wouldn't say if they were anonymous is cool. And Reddit manages to make it work. So I think it's very important for journalists to understand Reddit, take a look around, be in the subreddits. If there are subreddits that matter to your beat, then by all means go and check them out. But always remember that these sites are not representing the entire public. They're never going to represent your public. Your public is flesh and blood people, not avatars online. And it's really important to remember that. So I had a while where I thought, if everyone on Twitter likes it, then my job is done. But not everyone's on Twitter. There's actually not that many people still on Twitter. There's a lot more on Facebook. But not everyone's on Facebook either. And Reddit, my God, Reddit's 80% men. 85% men is crazy. Google Plus too. You're not getting a balanced anything on these sites. You're getting a lot of very vocal people who are vocal and will tell you what they think and will influence others because of their presence online. But you can't just be talking to those people. You can't just be talking for those people. So, the flesh and blood stuff is still really important. But it is absolutely essential to be on those channels. Yeah.
So for you, the whole branding thing, I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out. So when you were branding yourself or building that, what was the hardest part of that for you?
I always feel like I can never answer this question quite right, but because when I was quote unquote branding myself, no one was using that term and nobody even thought it was happening. So I got into Twitter in 2007, the year it started, and I started tweeting what I was doing at work because I was tweeting what I was doing, and things grew organically out of there. So people now kind of ask me oh, clearly you followed a plan and a strategy. I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't. So I kind of still stick to the strategy of being myself, but I'd be lying if I said that's all I do. You got to be really thoughtful about your content. I think it's almost more important to to market your content so that it can really sail. Because there's nothing worse than working really, really hard on a story you know matters and having no one read it. There's nothing worse. Because that story cannot have any power, right? So it's a lot about branding is just building relationships with those online voices, people who would care about this, that, or the other thing, knowing how to mention them in your tweet about the story, or even DMing them and saying, hey, you got to check this out. What do you think? Let me know. And being authentic about that so that if they actually tell you what you think, you actually respond, because that's your obligation. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it feels like the hardest part is not caring too much, is not going to the number of my followers and thinking that it matters more than anything, because it doesn't. Or not going like clout. I love to hate clout. I hate to love clout. Every time I go to clout, I feel gross. I do. Like, what's my clout score? It just, because yeah, of course, we all have egos. You know, we want to be so followed and we want to really be important. But I feel better when I'm not too obsessed about that. And I feel better when my follower count grows because I've just written something awesome. And you know, and I've put it out there a little bit, and then people dug it and found it and shared it. And that feels good. So I don't know. I don't know that I answered your question, but a lot of it is just it can't be the first and foremost thing in your mind. And it is really, really hard to get it started. But very quickly, building those relationships. And when you have very few followers, start talking to everyone. Start talking to everyone who shares something about your beat. Just talk. Spend most of your tweets should be ats to people. Yeah. Ha. It's a very good question. I've never been asked that. Maybe to an extent. But what I think too, though, is I worry that if I had majored in journalism then, I would have been locked into conventions that were about to go out of style. So I'm actually kind of glad, you know, because there were some journalism students kind of my age, and they had just come out of grad school, and they're, you know, they're more in love. They're more attached to certain things, I'm realizing, and I'm a little bit more okay letting them go and trying something new. And I'm not saying that would be the general thing, but you know, institutions are slow to change. And it took a couple years for them to kind of get into the new world a little bit. So I think about that. You know, of course, everybody looks at their own history and thinks it's the best possible path, but I think it was. It probably, yeah, I think it would have been a little bit easier. But I'll say this. I mean, one reason I really think that you learn journalism by doing is because they can't teach you the psychology of messing up, of being humiliated, of making lots of mistakes. Being embarrassed, you know, having an editor who can't believe you just screwed up the way you did. There's no class for that. Not to mention, somebody at Columbia University once asked me, and I thought this was an excellent question, that between reporting and writing, since those are kind of the two major skills, right, in journalism, at least when you write, there's also photography and things like that, but reporting and writing, which one is the hardest to develop? He asked. I thought that was brilliant. Writing, if you really wanted to, you can kind of develop in isolation. Meaning, you can read and you write. You read and you write, and you get better. You read and you write. Getting good at reporting means getting really good at really uncomfortable questions and getting into the kinds of conversations you would never want to get into as a nice person. And that is so hard. And that's something I think you learn by doing too. You know, when you're actually on the cops beat, and you really think that somebody's kind of pulling your leg, one of the PIOs, how are you going to do that? And your professor isn't there to coach you. And you have to, your heart's beating and racing, and you know that if you say the wrong thing, you might burn a bridge with this guy, but you also think something's kind of going on. How do you do that? So that's the thing that you just have to do it. And it sucks. And again, it's the kind of conversations nobody wants to have. And a good journalist has to be comfortable having them. Or at least, you know, be willing to have them. Yeah.
How have you continued your learning, since this is relatively new, but not really that new? So, like, what kind of, you know, websites do you go on or like participate in, just to continue learning how you can, you know, keep
I think for me, it's mostly following the activities of people. So I mentioned Clay Shirky, I mentioned Jay Rosen. So it's mostly them. If someone in that group of sort of thought leaders has an idea that's really reverberating, I'll probably find out about it. I'll probably go read it. Maybe I'll try to engage, or I'll just kind of take it with me. Neiman Journalism Lab does some good work. The Poynter Institute does some good work, just reporting about media news and trends. Those ethicists are really good too, so I recommend those sites. But people, follow the thought leaders, the people who have had some of these crazy ideas, might have a good gut sense about where things are headed to next.
I think my last piece of advice would be to follow Monica. Follow her on Twitter. Go to her website. She's a great thought leader to follow as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All righty.